I would just like to recap for the coaches on the most important parts that you have to remember is that you have to make sure that the athletes in your group has a medical diagnosis form that's been submitted before the classification. What Dawn talked about, deterioration. If the athlete, for example, can't throw the ball anymore and you want the athlete to now use a ramp, then there is a medical review form that you have to submit as well with all the information that's needed to see if this athlete can come in for a reclassification or not. Okay, so once we've gone through that process that Dawn has just explained, we allocate a class to the boccia athlete, and we're just going to go through those classes now. Thank you. Okay. If an athlete is eligible for a sport, the classification panel will assess which sport class this athlete is going to compete in. So once we've done all the testing, we've tested, say, for example, the athlete has cerebral palsy or a brain injury, you would, for example, test the spasticity. You would test if they've got involuntary movement, that is the ataxia or athetosis, and then you will determine a grade. Once you've got the grade and you've tested all the other things that we do, we can then see, like Dawn said, as they meet the impairment criteria of a certain class. But to confirm that, you have to see what happens in competition, and that is extremely important. And please, all the coaches, the athletes is sometimes very, very stressed out, and we know it is because it is a very intimidating process to be handled and to be asked to do things. It's different people that they don't know, but it's very important to actually get your athletes to be relaxed and just do what they do, and that is to play boccia. Once the athletes are grouped, you would see that those athletes can actually compete according to their limitations and not according to training. So the athlete that's going to train more, that's going to have good coaching, is the one that's going to win the medal, and not the one that is better off because he's stronger or he's got less impairment. Each class definitely has, he meets the impairment criteria, and now it's up to the coaching to make him the best in that class. The third point there, a sport class does not necessarily comprise athletes with the same impairment. So an athlete with spasticity, and that's the stiffness in the muscles, can compete against someone that's got involuntary movement, that's difficult to control that ball wherever he needs to put that ball or the control in his arm. It looks different, but in the end, they've got the same ability within that. Okay, so if we look at the BC1, good. So BC1 has always got a brain involvement. That means that he's been born with cerebral palsy. He either had a stroke or a traumatic brain injury. So there has to be either spasticity or athetosis or ataxia that we test during our classification process. The key features is that the athletes in BC1 will either throw the ball, or we also have our foot players in that class. All four limbs and the trunk has to be affected. So you can't have one good arm and three other arm is bad. Everything has to be affected. And between the ones and the twos, we're going to see that the twos has got less affected than the BC ones. Okay. They may require assistance to maneuver the chair, or they might be using a power wheelchair. They may hold the ball in a variety of ways. We find all sorts of ways that they can actually hold the ball, and you as a coach must find the best way for them to hold the ball and to be able to release the ball. Because in bocce, it's not about just holding the ball, it's actually releasing the ball into the field of play. Otherwise, you can't play, and then you will go to a BC3. So very important, you come in here to learn what is the problem and how can I overcome that problem, getting the ball where I want the ball to go. They might have problems, the BC1s, with the movement in their hands, but sometimes you find that they have got grip and they can grasp and release the ball. But then you might find that the rest of the arm has got more involvement. If you look at spasticity in a BC1, you will find that it's a grade 2, grade 3 spasticity in the arm. Now, what that means is if you look at the movement, for example, in an overhand throw, that means the ball is taken and you actually bend your elbow and then you straighten your elbow and you throw the ball into the field of play. You find that there's a stop, a block in that throw before the arm reached 90 degrees or up to 90 degrees. So you have to find a way to get the ball further by doing different movements, and each athlete learns. So you as a coach can, when you start coaching someone, is really to first just get the athlete to throw balls and see what happens. Is it a stop? Is it the athlete can't go further? Sometimes you see if they prepare, they're able to go further, but as soon as they try to throw the ball, there's a block. With our athetosis and ataxia, is that there is severe involuntary movements. The ball is shaking all over the place, but they manage to get that movement in a way that they can actually throw the ball. In an underhand throw, that is the one where you have the ball at the bottom with a straight arm, and you throw the ball into the field of play. We look at the spasticity around the shoulder. And also the involuntary movement, we will look all over. They may have difficulty releasing, and they may be using a lot of forwards, backwards movements, preparing, and eventually find the right moment to actually release the ball. How do they get the ball into play? Okay, they either throw it or they kick it. And they may have more than one way of throw. In the old days, they said they could only throw one way, but our BC1s can also throw either overhand or underhand or a dart throw, whatever is comfortable for them and whatever they find is best for the shot they're playing. Sometimes they need accuracy, they might have an overhand throw, but sometimes they need distance and they might use an underhand throw. The most important thing in BC1 is that it is severely involved. It's very difficult for them to actually release that ball or to get distance as another player in a BC2 class, for example. Okay, so if we look at BC2, that is also a brain involvement. So once again, we're talking about athletes with cerebral palsy, that either had a stroke or a traumatic brain injury. That's the TBI on the screen, traumatic brain injury. Okay, so key features, once again, all 4 limbs and the trunk is affected. Now, I didn't say much on the trunk in BC1. With the trunk, you find that in a BC1, they've got a very stiff trunk. The trunk might not be able to move forwards, backwards, sideways, controlled. They might be able to do it, but the moment they throw, you look at what the trunk is doing when they actually throw. The very important thing for us about the trunk is if an athlete uses his trunk, our determining factors on which class it's going to be is he using the trunk to actually release the ball? If you keep the trunk back and you hold the trunk in classification, you ask him to throw the ball, he can't release the ball. Then you know he needs his trunk to actually release the ball. But in other places and other classes, we can find that they use the trunk to get more force behind the ball. And if they're able to do that, the question mark comes in. Is that trunk eligible for boccia? Because you should not be able to use any part of your body to get force behind the ball. That's a skill that you develop with a limited ability that you have. Okay, so very important when we look at the trunk. So in BC2, all 4 limbs is also affected. The impairment, however, is less than in a BC1. The trunk and in the arm, for example, with spasticity in overhand throw, you will find that the block is past the midline. So if I throw the ball from my hand by my shoulder, I straighten the elbow, the block or the stop that you will see when they throw will be more than 90 degrees. That's a grade 2 spasticity. But once again, you have to see that block in the throw to be eligible for a BC2. The same with the underhand throw, that you might see the block in the shoulder extensor. That is when you take your arm backwards. And if there's spasticity in the muscles at the back of your shoulder and you throw the ball forward, they will contract and they will prevent you from getting a follow through, a movement through. When we normally throw, we move our arm through in the direction of the throw if you've got a normal arm. But with our BC1s and our BC2s, you can definitely see the effect, and they don't have that follow through. A BC2 might have some way of getting a follow through. A BC1 will probably go completely in a different direction as the ball, but that is their way of managing to get the ball into the play. A BC2 definitely is not allowed to have any assistance, and as coaches, needing assistance is not a reason to be a BC1. If the athlete is classified and he is found a BC2, you have to find a way to get this athlete to be on the field of play without any assistance. So that is really, really important. Assistance is not a reason for being in a BC1 class, for sure. How do they get the ball into the field of play? They throw. All our BC2s are throwers. They can throw the ball further on the court with a bit more power than a BC1. They can use both upper limbs, and remember always that we assess both limbs, because if the one is better than the other one, you might tell us, okay, nobody only used the bad arm, and we can assure you that if it comes to a thing that you really need to win that point, you are going to use your better arm for sure. So we assess both arms, and both arms have to meet the minimum impairment criteria for that class. The player may have some directional follow through, as I say, that he's able to follow, the arm will follow the direction of the ball in a BC2 class. But it's not a normal movement that you will see. You will definitely still see the block of the spasticity, or you will see the involuntary movement. Now, the difference between a BC1 and a BC2, where it comes to the athetosis and ataxia, and that's the involuntary movement, is that a BC2 might find a way to control the involuntary movement a bit more. For example, someone hooking their arm at the back of the chair, and they're able to stabilize themselves a bit better, and you can then see a smoother movement in the preparation. But in classification, we always have to see that impairment. So either on the release or in the actual movement, we have to see that involuntary movement to be able to be a BC2. Otherwise, you are not eligible for a BC2 if we can't see the impact of the impairment on the actual throw. And that is very important as well. When we say a BC2 has got to have grade 2 spasticity, for example, and we find, yes, we've tested and we see, yes, there is grade 2 spasticity, But when we do the technical assessment and this athlete throws the ball and you do not see the impact, the stop in that actual from the spasticity in that arm when he released the ball, we might say he's not eligible for a BC2 even though he's got grade 2 spasticity. The same with a BC1. They might have grade 3 spasticity. That just say that yes, you meet the impairment criteria, but now we have to see, does it impact it enough to make you a BC1, or will you be a BC2 with a grade 3 spasticity? So BC2 can also, for example, have grade 3 spasticity. It's just that the impact when you actually throw is less than what it would be in a BC1. Okay, so BC3. So BC3, very important. It's either a brain injury or it's non-neurological. There's no brain involvement. That will be like muscular dystrophy that's got muscle power impairment or range of motion impairment, meaning that you don't have full movement of your limbs. Now, very important in boccia is that if you have a problem with your range of your movement, you still have to have muscle power that is a 3 out of 5. Now, I'll explain that in a little bit when we get to BC4, but just keep that in mind. So always it was said that before that we had a CP on the field of play. It is not like that anymore. A BC3 is a BC3. If you've got a brain injury or not a brain injury, if you meet the criteria, you're a BC3, and a pair has to have 2 BC3s on the field of play. And that for the coaches is very important to remember. You do not have to have someone with a brain injury or with cerebral palsy on the field of play anymore. That we do not discriminate against a diagnosis. Okay, so the eligible impairment, once again, spasticity, dystonia, which is the involuntary movements of athetosis and ataxia, the impaired muscle power, that means that you haven't got the muscle power in your muscles to actually throw the ball, or the impaired range of movement, that it is not able to get the ball because you do not have the range to actually move the ball. And those are the athletes that is severely contracted, that has got difficulty to move their arms. They are stuck in certain positions. The medical diagnosis there, once again, your cerebral palsy, your stroke, your traumatic brain injury, conditions such as muscular dystrophy, and your spinal cord injury. That's the SCI, spinal cord injury. So the key features is it's the most physically impaired class that we have. In classification, we determine that they are unable to throw the ball or to grasp the ball or to throw it into the field of play, or kick. Remember, we always have to assess that they can't kick the ball, because if they can kick the ball, then they have to go to a BC1 or a BC4 foot player. But if, depending on their diagnosis, so you have to always remember that you have to, if a new athlete comes in, make sure if they can't throw the ball, that they can't kick it either. That's important. Okay, they might fit the physical profile of a BC1 or a BC4 athlete, but they're unable to hold or throw the ball. Now, when we assess them, the criteria and the rules says that they have to be able to release the ball into the field of play up to the cross, and that's the little penalty box in the middle with a cross, with purposeful direction. So if you ask an athlete to throw the ball to the cross where the white jack is in the middle of the penalty ball, and the athlete throws completely in a different direction, that can also count. But you don't put an athlete in the class if you haven't practiced and made sure that this athlete cannot improve. And that's very important for coaches as well to remember, is that when an athlete comes and you see, oh, he's not reaching the cross, I think I'll just get him to play with a ramp. Do not do that unless the athlete has practiced to get the ball up to the cross or beyond it is very important not to make them a BC3 before you have really determined that this athlete cannot do it. Because when we assess them and we find that they can actually throw up to the cross, they might not be trained athletes to actually throw the ball. We can tell them they have to go back and be a BC1 until we're really sure that they are not able to reach that point. So be very careful for making someone a BC3 before you're really sure they cannot reach that cross. Okay, that 5 meters, that's the 5 meters up to the cross, what we call into the field of play. So how does a BC3 play? Once you've determined they really are a BC3 athlete that cannot hold or release the ball into the field of play, you will then, they will require a ramp and an assistant, and they can release the ball either with their hand or with a mouse pointer, a head pointer, a hand pointer. But we've got quite a few athletes that can actually hold the ball with their hand and they can actually just release it. And you have to know all the rules around the BC3 class to really train a BC3 athlete well. Okay, BC4. So our BC4 athletes are those that hasn't got a brain injury. They've got problems with muscle power, with range of motion, or, for example, the photo at the bottom there, where they have got limb deficiencies. Very important that they still have to meet the minimum impairment criteria of a BC4. So the weakness is a grade 3 or less in your muscles. Now, what that means is when we test muscle power, we use a grade of a 0 to a 5. A 0 is where you're not able to do any movement. When the classifier holds the muscle, they feel the muscle, they cannot even feel a flicker. A 1 will be that you can feel a flicker, but there's no active movement in the movement that you ask the athlete to do. A grade 2 is the movement without gravity. If you can move a limb against gravity, you have to have some power, and that is then a grade 3. The moment you're able to hold a ball, for example, and lift the ball up into the air and hold it there, it's more than a grade 3, because that means that there is some resistance. For example, a ball that's light, but you can still lift it, and the classifiers will test it by giving resistance to a movement. So you have to be able to not get any movement or a little bit of movement, but not with resistance. Sometimes as a coach, it's also good for you can see if you fill a 500 milliliter water bottle and ask the athlete if you've got new athletes, to lift the bottle a few times. Well, if they can do that with a straight arm, for example, that muscle is too strong to be eligible for BC4, and you're most probably going to have a BC5 player on a national level. Okay, so the key features for BC4 is all 4 limbs still has to be affected. So both arms has to meet the minimum impairment criteria to be eligible to play in the BC4 class. The weakness has to be a grade 3 or less. There might be joint limitation. If it's only joint limitation, they still have to have grade 3 or less in their muscles to be eligible to play as a BC4. And in BC4, they have no assistance. They don't require. If they've got difficulty to maneuver the chair, they'll have to find a way or have a power wheelchair, because they're not allowed to have any assistance on the field of play. How do they get the ball into play? They can also throw the ball overhand or underhand, or a dart throw. That means with 2 hands, you actually throw the ball from your chest straight out, or they can kick the ball. So there might be people with juvenile arthritis, for example, where their hands is so badly affected, but they're able to still kick a ball, then they can be a BC4 foot player. Players may use one or more of the following throws. As I say, they can have a swing, an underarm throw, a pendulous swing. They can have an overarm, or like we say, overhand throw, or bilateral. They have the ball with both hands and they throw from their chest. Players may have some directional follow through, and we see that much more in the BC4 class, that they have some directional follow through because they haven't got other opponents such as spasticity or involuntary movements that will prevent them. But very important that you have to see the weakness at the end. So that's when you find the muscular dystrophy athletes with lack of muscle power will, after they release the ball, the arm will drop away quickly. It will drop down or it will fall on their lap. They have to have trunk involvement, because a trunk in a BC4 athlete that is too strong will help them to get force behind a ball. So they will find a way to hold on to the side. If we test them, we see that they don't have all the muscle power, and the muscle power in the trunk also has to be less than a grade 3 or a grade 3 or less in the actual trunk. So very important. If you have someone with a very good trunk, they're most likely not going to be eligible for BC4, even though their arms might be eligible. Their trunk will help them, and that we find a lot of times with arthrogryposis. That's also a condition in this class, but their trunks is normally very strong, and you have to make sure that that trunk is not too strong for actually being a BC4 athlete. All right. The similar functionality as a BC2, but we also find in the BC4 class, it's a very wide class. So you have your athletes that is severely affected, your muscular dystrophy that can just about still get the ball into the field of play. That looks more like a BC1 player, for example, because of all the weakness. So very, very wide range of athletes in the BC4 class. Their ability to generate power is through momentum, by initiating the movement with some trunk movements, but once again, make sure that trunk is not too strong for being eligible for a BC4. Okay, then the BC5. Now, important to just remember is that they are not including BC5 on international level, but BC5s are still eligible to play on a national level. And in most of the countries, we still have our BC5 class at all our national competitions. In the BC5 class, we have our brain injury, and we have the ones that has got no brain injury, which has got muscle power involvement. The difference between your BC5 and your BC2 and 4 is that they've got a bit more power than a BC4 and a bit less spasticity, ataxia, or athetosis than a BC2. Okay, they can also throw or kick the ball. Most of that, what we've seen is throwing the ball in this class, not really kicking. But if their muscle power in the legs, they're not able to use the arms, and the muscle power in the legs does not meet the impairment criteria of a BC4, for example, yes, they can kick in a BC5 class. They can definitely throw the ball further than a BC2 and a BC4 with more power, okay, because they've got less spasticity that's affecting the throw. They've got more muscle power that can help them to get a stronger throw. Both upper limb must still have impairment, and very important that you still see impairment when they throw. It can't look like a normal arm. You have to see some indication of spasticity, some indication of muscle power loss in that actual throw to be eligible for a BC5. Okay. So in summary, classification is there to make the competition fair for all athletes in the sport, and especially in boccia. We are dealing with severely disabled athletes, and it gives them the sense of knowing that I can do something. And that is what classification is so important, that we have to class them in groups where they can feel comfortable that everybody in this group has got the same ability. It's going to be, have I trained more? Have I had better coaching? Anything, my talents, I can develop a skill to be the best in my class, but everybody in that class has got the same ability. The three main steps, once again, and where you come in as coaches to make sure that before competition we have that medical diagnosis form, because as classifiers, although we may be a physio or a doctor, we are not allowed to diagnose an athlete in classification because we do not have the equipment. I mean, to be able to say you've got muscular dystrophy, they have to have a muscle biopsy to determine that, yes, it is muscular dystrophy. So we need that medical diagnosis form to be able to confirm the diagnosis. In classification, we then confirm, yes, okay, he has cerebral palsy because we find spasticity there and it meets the minimum impairment criteria for that, for boccia, that he is actually able to participate in the sport. Okay. A sport class and a sport class status can only be given by a trained classification panel, and that's only after the whole process. But you as coaches, when you scan athletes, you can now, with the information and going into the rules, the classification rules again, you can see this athlete has got a brain injury. Okay, so I'm going to look at a BC1 or a BC2 class. This athlete has got muscular dystrophy. I'm going to look more at a BC4 or a BC5 class. With CP, you can also, brain injury, look at BC5 class, or if they can't throw the ball, then I'm looking at a BC3 class. The sport class status, it's important to know that if your athlete leaves a competition with a sport class status of review or review fixed date, is that he will be classified at a competition that he attends after 12 months from the first classification. If he has a confirmed status, remember, classification never stops. So if the athlete showed that he is a BC1 and suddenly at the next competition we find that, oh boy, this athlete does not show all the things that he did before, he does not meet the impairment criteria of a BC1, we will call him in and he will be reclassified. Okay, so very important. A confirmed status does not mean that he won't be watched or won't be classified ever again. It just means that the panel was certain that he met the impairment criteria and they observed him and he was fine in a certain class after 2 classifications. Then he can have a confirmed status. BC3s can have a confirmed status after the first classification if we're certain they are not able to throw or kick a ball. It's unlikely that they're going to, in a year's time, be able to throw or kick a ball. So they can go from a new status to a confirmed status after only 1 classification. You can support your athletes and the sport personnel with classification by providing proper education. So very important, this does not make you a classifier, but it gives you the knowledge to go out there and be able to scan athletes, to be able to ask the right questions and to be able to explain to your athlete what is classification all about. And that to us is extremely important. And at any time, if you've got in your clubs or in your regions, wherever you are coaching, if you ever have questions, please ask. That is why we as classifiers are there to help and assist you to make the best decision for your athlete and how to train your athlete in the end if you've got knowledge about the impairments. Thank you.